everyone, and welcome to this episode of our Software Success. So today we are going to be talking again about My Quilt Planner to help you plan your quilting design. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that later. And so let's see where everybody's joining from and give others a time to pop in. And I also saw that we already have a question, so I'll address that too. I see we have people again from all over. So I see we have Atlanta, sunshine Atlanta. That is awesome. We have been so rainy down here in Florida. It's not so much the sunshine state at the moment. And so hello from Beaver, Pennsylvania. Thank you for joining, Virginia. And I see we have Washington State, my old stomping grounds up there. Donna, thanks for joining. Lancaster, PA. Julie Fry, thanks for joining, Julie. She's also a friend in one of our sewing shops up there. And we have Georgia again. And Mary Ann is a supporter of our software, and she said, so happy to see another lesson on My Quilt Planner. And today on My Quilt Planner, we're going like a little bit more in depth. So I hope you guys do really enjoy this. And then Donna Hartwich, thank you for joining from Australia. And then Rhonda Adams from Dallas. That's where our home office is in Texas, there in Dallas. So thanks for joining. Kansas City, Missouri. So thanks for joining, Sheila. So all over. Homestead, Florida again. So Harriet Palmer, I think I mentioned last week, you and I are neighbors. I'm down in Key Largo. Thanks for joining, Joanne. So Joanne Banco, you guys know her. She is over there at Let's Go Sew. And she's also a collaborator with us here at Dime. So thanks for joining. Snow in Northeast Ohio. So Joanne, I won't tell you what my temperature is here. Or maybe you like the snow. So maybe you prefer that. Auburn, Washington. I used to be in Puyallup. So thanks for joining us. Crescent City, California. Thanks for joining, Mary. So we have people from all over. So before we even got started, I noticed that Dawn asked a question. Is that Whisk, maybe? So sorry if I butchered that, but she asked, she's from Missouri, and she was asking what the difference in My Quilt Planner and EQ8. So EQ8 is not a dime program, but I do know a bit about it because I do use it myself. So I'll share with you the difference in the two. So EQ8 is a program for planning your layout of your quilt for piecing it. You can design your own quilt blocks and design your quilt layout. It'll let you know the fabric so that you can sew it together. Everything we do here at Dime is embroidery. So we are more along the embroidery planning side. So My Quilt Planner is planning the embroidery quilting design layout. So if you've ever wanted to quilt with your embroidery machine, no matter how you piece it, if you piece it on your embroidery machine or piece it on your sewing machine, or maybe you even like to do hand sewing on your quilts, and you want to quilt it on your embroidery machine, My Quilt Planner is going to help with designing that layout. So you'll know how many hoopings, where to start, things like that. So completely different programs, 180 degrees different. So EQ8, again, not a dime program, but I do actually own that and use that program. So I know a little bit about it. And those blocks and your quilt layout, we can read the format from EQ8 if you export it as a, I think a WMF file. I think it'll export as that, and then you can actually read it in. So we do work with a lot of other different programs there. We still have people joining from all over the Netherlands. That is awesome. Thank you for joining, Lydia from the Netherlands. So I am glad to see all of you guys here. So today we are going to talk about My Quilt Planner again. And so I will be sharing with you some more in-depth stuff. Now, remember, My Quilt Planner is the software we'll install, you will have installed on your computer to do what I'm doing today. But if you own other Dime software programs, some of the things that I'm doing today to manipulate the design you can also do on other dime programs. So it's the quilting layout that My Quilt Planner is bringing us. And so I'm going to be showing you how you can audition your designs on an image of your quilt. So you can actually take a photograph of your quilt and import it into the software, and you can design right on it. So that is super helpful if you're trying to avoid an area of your quilt, or if you have a quilt design that's a unique kind of design. So that's what we're talking about today. So, and then Dawn, thanks for joining. Dawn from Creative Appliques. So it's always good to see you here too. So we still have people jumping on. So, but we'll get started because you can rewatch this. Remember, if you go to our YouTube channel under the past lives, you'll be able to see any of these Softwork Success as well as our Between Friends episodes. You can rewatch them as many times as you like. They're always there. Okay, so let's talk about a little bit more what we're going to talk about today. So an image of your quilt is super helpful when designing. And so I have some images here that I'm going to import and we can use as designing purposes to help create our quilting design to avoid areas or to fit unique shapes quilts or unique designs of quilts. So for this quilt, for instance, I'll show you how to create a design that you can avoid the embroidery that we have placed on here. But also you can use this method I'm going to show you to create designs that's going to fit in your hoop. Like say you have a 12 by 12 block, but of course we don't have a hoop that's that large. Then we can make designs in smaller segments as well. So, and then Anne Philback says, do I need Quilt Planner if I don't quilt with my embroidery machine? Well, I don't think you do. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. So really all the features, some of our software has a lot of overlapping types of features. It's not really just quilting. Like Quilt Embellisher is not just for the quilter. Oh my gosh, it has so much in it. But I really feel like Quilt Planner is a program that really, I'm thinking of all the features it's really for quilt planning, but also other projects too that might be smaller quilted projects. So like if you're quilting, say, a bench pillow, if you're quilting a wall hanging, if you're quilting a tree skirt, which is my next image that I have coming up here. So if you are quilting things like this, it's great for helping plan that as well. So I would say, Anne, any quilting project on your embroidery machine that is larger than one hoop, this is really helpful for that. So, but if you do zero quilting on your embroidery machine, then My Quilt Planner might not be the right program for you. So, but unique layouts, you can also import pictures of unique layouts, like if you're working on something that's maybe like a table topper or a tree skirt. Or the other image there is a t-shirt quilt that I designed for my husband using his old military t-shirts that he had left over. And I was tired of seeing them just being stored. So the layout is very unique. And so you can take a picture and import that and design on top of it. So I'm going to show you several different ways to do that in My Quilt Planner. So let's head over there into the software. So I'll show you this one in a bit. So let's just start with a new page first, and let's do the avoiding the embroidery, because this is a question we get a lot. So I think it's probably one that is going to be most helpful. Now, just a quick review. Last 2 weeks ago, when we were talking about My Quilt Planner, we talked about building the quilt. So if you missed that episode, go ahead and go back and watch it 2 weeks ago, because I go into details on building your virtual quilt here so that we can do our designing. But My Quilt Planner has this built-in quilt layout tool that you click up here in the top left, and then you fill out this information about your quilt, and then we can design on top of it. Now, the quilt image that I am going to import, so let me bring that in first, because you do need to have your quilt top finished to put the information in, or at least have your design ready to go. So to bring in an image of a quilt for design purposes, you're going to choose the File and Load Backdrop option. Load Backdrop allows you to select an image. Now, this can be a photograph, which is what some of these are here. It can also be a layout that maybe you've designed in EQ8 or another program that you have that you can save as an image. Notice these file formats here. I've got JPEGs, PNGs, a bitmap too would work in this instant, but you would take a photograph of your quilt or either save your planned quilt as a JPEG image, which will allow you to bring that in. Okay. So once you've done that, you've got an image on the screen that we can design on top of. Now, when you bring in an image, it's very important to define the scale. This particular quilt that I designed here has 10-inch blocks, and there are 3 across and 3 down, even though it makes this really cool alternate pattern here. But you can see that I've got this block, and this block repeated throughout my quilt. So this is a 10-inch block, 3 across and 3 down. So if I click over here underneath my backdrop option, I can choose define scale. Define scale is important when you are working with an image because our photographs that we take don't come in to the software the exact size of the quilt. Okay, so you're going to pick a point on your quilt. You can either mark the entire distance. So once I've chose the define scale, I'm going to just do it over here. I want to click and hold my mouse and drag, and it draws a line. And the distance of that line, when I release this, it asks me what distance is that, so that it knows the actual distance of the quilt block or the entire quilt that I'm doing. So now let's do it on the quilt top. So I'm going to choose define scale. Now I can either do the entire quilt from here to here, and I could tell this that this is 30 inches across, and it will make those adjustments, or I can just measure one block. So let's do that. So I'm going to do define scale. Now I'm going to measure this incorrectly so you can see it actually change, because this image is actually almost the right size. So when I click and drag, so this is actually a 10-inch block, but let's say it was only 5 inches or 6 inches. When you enter that number and click OK, do you see how it adjusts the size of the image? That's very important, because then when you import your embroidery designs or you design on top of it, those designs will be the correct size for your actual quilt. So I'm going to do an undo, and I already set that for the 30 inches the first time we did it. So when I did the undo, it'll put it back to that. So, okay, so now let's design on top of this to avoid our embroidery here. So I'm going to go into my quilt settings, and now my quilt that's on the screen we know is 30 by 30, and it has 10-inch blocks. Now I have a hoop that a 10-inch design will fit in, and you may not, but I will give you some tips on that as we're going. So now my quilt has 2 different styles of blocks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to color these to represent where I have the embroidery, and then another color to represent where I don't have the embroidery, so I can put different designs on my quilt. Okay. Now we went over this 2 weeks ago. These colors are actually going to be an auto repeat of the design, like an auto preview, I guess I should say. It's not an actual copy of the design. So anywhere I have the same color, that means I want the same embroidery design. Anywhere I have a different color, then I want a different embroidery design. So the A2, B1, C2, and B3 will be all the same embroidery quilting design. And then the blue will be the opposite. And I'm going to make this here a darker color so we can really see our design. And I'm going to lighten this up to 10 so that we can really see that it doesn't cover up the image of our quilt too much. So, and then I'm going to say okay. And now it added that on top. So let me hide my image. Over here to the left is your backdrop show and hide option. So if I click it, it'll turn off the image. So now you can see our colors are still there. And then when I turn the image of my quilt back on, that's what we're really designing on top of. Now, if the background of your quilt is a little too dark to see your designing, you could always lighten that up. So if you click away from your quilt in the white area, then you have this option over here for the backdrop settings. Now, the backdrop settings will allow you to lighten up the the background quilt image. So let me put it about halfway here, and then I'm going to click my apply, and you can see it lightened up my background. Let me do it a little bit more so we can really see. Okay. And that just makes it easier to design on top, so you can see your design over anything else is really what that's helpful for. So now let's add our design. So for my quilt planner, we would choose a design. So I'm going to choose a design that I could use that would avoid my embroidery. So I'm going to start with this feather here and click OK. And then this is small for my block. I want it to fit my entire 10-inch block. So I can just click one time on this fit to cell and it will make it as large as it can for my block. So now if I choose this design and I copy it up here at the top and paste it, and then I'm going to mirror it both horizontally and vertically, and it just puts it on the other side. So now this is a way that you can create a design to avoid your quilt block. Now, if you have a hoop that is a 10 by 10, then what I would recommend is grouping these together, because then when you export your quilt, it will export it as the one design. And I'll show you that coming up here in just a minute. If you don't have a hoop that's a 10 by 10, so if I go over here to my transform options, whatever you have selected on the screen, it'll actually tell you the size of it right here. So that design, I have both parts selected and it is a 10 by 10 design. If you don't have a hoop that's a 10 by 10, then you could select these designs separately. If you leave them ungrouped, they will actually export as a separate file. Now, even though in this orientation, you're still dealing with a 10 by 10 design, but if you actually hooped this block on the diagonal, your design would actually fit like this in the hoop. And this design, half of it is a almost 7 by 14. So depending on the hoop that you own, you could not only hoop that full block in a 10 by 10 square to get that quilted, but you might be able to break your design up in pieces in order to get it hooped. Now, this design is actually one unit, and I don't have a way to split those two feathers unless I have another dime software. My Quilt Embellisher will do it, or Perfect Embroidery Pro will do it, and there are some others of ours that will allow you to edit that embroidery quilting design. But my quilt planner is for planning. It's not about the editing of the design. So you'll need another one if you want to do that. But if this design does not fit within your hoop, then you could always choose something else. So I'm going to go back into the built-in designs, and I know there's a design in here that would work. We could work with this individual feather here if we want, but I think this one here would be a good one. So this particular design is just a 1/4 of a design. So I could choose this one, and I'm going to copy it, paste it, and let's just make it a 1/4 of a turn. I'm just using my rotate tools here, and then slide that down to the bottom. And then if I select both halves of that, I can do the same thing, copy, paste, mirror image here, and then just slide that over to the other side. Now, this design here that we've created, we could actually stitch in quadrants. So in this design, if I select just one quadrant, it's a 4.14 by 4.07 for that design size. So I could quilt that in my hoop that is, you know, say a 4.5 by 4.5 or larger. I could quilt that one piece. So you can do this with smaller hoops as well. If I was doing 4 designs like this, you know, I would make sure that I, you know, line those up. Use your alignment tools here to make sure that you've got everything straight, and before you do your export. That's a helpful way to make sure that everything's nice and lined up. Now, another thing that you could do here is maybe you have a hoop that would fit 2 of these. So you don't necessarily have to hoop 4 pieces for this one block. If I select both of these together and I go over to my transform, this particular design is a 4.14 by 9.7. So 6 by 10 is a very common hoop size for embroidery machines. So if you have a hoop size that's 6 by 10, you could hoop half of this block at a time to get these quilted. Okay, so that's a really easy way to avoid embroidery designs. And I'm going to show you what I mean by grouping these together. But let's put one more design here. So I'm going to go back well, actually, let's import a design. In case somebody didn't watch last week, you can import designs that are outside of the software. So I'm going to do a file and merge. And so this will be a refresher from last week. You will locate the embroidery design on your computer. And so this is one that I'll just use here. And then it comes into the center. So you want to move it to the block. And then in this case here, I'm going to click to fill the cell and it'll make it the size of my whole block there. Okay. So we've designed our quilt and these designs are going to avoid our embroidery. So I'm going to do 2 different saves here. This is also a refresher from last week. Make sure you do file and save as. And then I'm just going to go to my desktop. I have a test folder here. And this, I'm going to call this my embroidery quilt. And, oh, I've got my caps lock on. Don't you love that? Embroidery quilt. And make sure that you do this first save as a C2S. Remember, that's the format for our software, Dime software. This is the native format. So save this first save in the native format. That's so we can get back to this layout if we close it, okay? And then the next thing you're going to do is you want to export this quilt layout. So I'm going to do an export quilt here, and inside of this folder here. So this, it looks like I only have these 2 designs, but this actually is the whole quilt. So let's call this our embroidery quilt 1. I'm going to export this one with a number 1 behind it because I'm going to do 2 different types of exports here. Well, it's the same type of export, but I'm going to do something different to the design so you can see what happens. So PES is the format for my embroidery machine. So make sure you choose your PES format. This one, you want your machine format. And then I've got it named EMB1, and I'm going to click save. And then it automatically opens the folder that the designs are in. So I'm going to click my view, and remember, view and extra large icons, I can see these because I have Perfect Stitch Viewer. So you can see that it actually exported the designs for my quilt. I've got those 4 corner pieces. So I only need, in this case, a hoop that is a 4.5 by 4.5 larger to quilt these quadrants. But now this one was a 10 by 10 block. So we would have had to do something completely different for that one if you did need your small hoop. But I'm trying to make a point here about exporting the designs. These designs are 4 separate designs on my planned quilt. So when I export them, even though they're in the same block, it exports them as individual designs. Now, let's say that you have a hoop that is a 6 by 10. So you actually want this to export as the right half and the left half rather than the 4 corners. So if I select both of these and click the group option, it puts my 2 together as grouped together as these 2 selected. So now you can see that they are they're not combined as one, but they are grouped together as that one design. So now let's do our export again. And for this one, I'm going to name it EMB2 so we know that we've got a different set of files. And don't forget, this is where you would choose your embroidery machine format. So I also own a Viking, so I'll choose the VP3 for the second one there. And when this opens up, you can see now it exported as a half of my block rather than 4 separate pieces. So if you're designing in individual pieces, you can group them together for the software to export it just as you want to use it. This is also a really good option for if you're working with a block that's larger than your hoop. So these are 10 by 10 blocks, but I also make blocks that are 12 by 12 sometimes. So exporting 12 by 12 blocks, we don't have a hoop that's that large. So if you have 2 separate halves or 4 6 by 6 designs, you can do that as well. For this block here, I'm going to do another file merge. And if I go back to my designs here. So this is a quilting design that I own. It's one that we have here at Dime that I used, but this is the same exact thing as if you wanted to import designs from another designer. But this one here, this half design would be another good one for this block. So this is a 10 by 10 block. Now, another tip when you're quilting and you're trying to land your design exactly in a block, I usually make my design a little bit smaller. So I'm gonna first undo that. Let's not do that. It was about to make it too big. Let me go back to my properties over here for transform, and I'm going to click the maintain aspect ratio. So the height of the design, I'm going to make it 9.5. We know my block is 10 inches. But that's going to give me a little bit of wiggle room to make sure that it is falls within my block. So, and I really like doing that if I'm making this block by block. And then this particular block here, the width is 4.8. So that is perfect for my 10 by 10 block. If I were to copy it, paste it, and then bring that over here to the other side. And if I zoom in, remember your zoom tool is super helpful. I can click and drag a box and I can see how close I am to those designs, and that's perfect. So, and then I can select both of them by holding down your control key. Click on one and then click on the other with the control key. And then you can use your alignment tools here to make sure that they're straight there in that block. So, and now we have a block that is designed for a smaller hoop. So these two designs, I would stitch in one hooping. This half, I would stitch in one hooping, and then I would do the other half there. Now I would go, this would probably be my first design. This would probably be the second one, and then I would move up and then down here for these designs here for the quilting. So that's how you can use an image to avoid not just embroidery. This is just an example, but also you can use it if there's a particular pattern in your fabric that you really want to make sure to either avoid or quilt around. So, and I have another example of that coming up. But let's see if we have any questions on this at the moment before we go on to the next layout, which is a unique kind of quilt layout. So we don't have those specific blocks. So I wanted to share that with you. So if I scroll back up here and then see what questions that we have. Let's start here. So Barb Cole says, what's the best way to take a photo of your quilt that I can import? So Barb, I just use my phone. If you have a camera on your phone, I use my camera. Now, a lot of times your quilts are like much larger than you can get a flat image because you want it to be as straight on as possible. What I do is I actually, and you'll actually see like this in one of the next images I bring up, is I use like a pant hanger that has the clips, and I clip to the top of my quilt, and then I actually hang that on a curtain rod for a really a big sliding glass door window, and then I can get that picture straight on from that angle, because if you lay it out on the floor, you can't get that high above it to get a flat image. So that's really hard unless you have like a selfie stick or something that would help. But I usually take it with my phone, and then I either connect my phone to my computer to get my images, or I can download it from my iCloud because I use an iPhone, or I can email it to myself. So whatever I feel like that day is how I do it. And then when you bring that image in to your program, just make sure you define the scale. So and Dawn says, all my military t-shirts, I can relate. Yes, he had a ton of them and they were just taking up space. So I finally made him a quilt out of them, Dawn. And you'll see a picture of that here in just a minute. So, and then Libby Hoffman, thanks, Libby. And she says, is it an actual photo of your quilt? It is. And this one right here is not. This one is I designed in my program and added, but I'm going to show you bringing in an actual photo. So this was just an image, but I actually do both. If I design in a program where I can export the image, it just makes it easier because it's always perfectly flat. But a lot of times I don't have that. And so I will bring in an actual image. So you'll see that coming up here in just a bit. So, and then what other questions do we have here? I agree, Jennifer Alexander. Thanks for joining. She's a frequent flyer with our software. She says that the Perfect Stitch Viewer is awesome. I love it. I definitely agree. It makes it easier to see your designs. So, and then Chris says, so 3 hoopings per block on a 6x10. So in the design that I had on the screen, that 10-inch block, I actually had it separated into 2 halves. So with a 6x10, you could do that in 2 hoopings. If you were trying to do the 4 quadrants, then that would be 4 separate hoop. And so basically you've got to, the designs have to be able to fit into your hoop. And so whether you have broken those designs up into separate pieces that you're hooping separately, or if you're connecting them like with edge to edge, but they do need to be able to fit in your hoop, which is the biggest point. So, and then Facebook user, not sure who that is, but they said I'm late. No big deal. All of these are available once we're done live today. You will find it on our YouTube channel in the past videos, so you can rewatch it and pick up where you missed. And so no big deal whatsoever. And then Facebook user also says, if you use a smaller size, will the stitches meet on the next block? So I'm not really sure I understand. If you use a smaller size, will the stitches meet on the block? Or you mean smaller size hoop? Is that what you mean? If you want them to link up, that's what we call edge to edge or continuous line quilting. So then you would have to make those points meet if that's what you're referring to. But feel free to clarify, and I will read the comments. So, okay, so I think that's all the comments that I see for now. Also, if you do have a question, so that I don't miss it, if you'll put the question marks, like 3 of them before you start typing your question, it just makes it easier to pick out of the list there. Okay, so now let's talk about if you're designing on something that is not, it doesn't have the setting for the squares. So I'm going to do open up a new page here, and I am going to select my setup or my picture first. It doesn't really matter. If you already know what your quilt is, you can go ahead and select the setup and build it and then import your image. It doesn't matter the order. So for this one, I'm going to use an image of a jelly roll quilt that I created. So this one here, this quilt image is a jelly roll quilt, and you can actually see, I'm going to zoom in here, that's an actual photograph. So I hung this on my trusty hangers and my curtain rod, and was able to take a picture of this, and I just cropped it out. You can see my batting up there and down below. And this quilt, you want to make sure any quilt that you bring in to define the scale. So remember, click define scale, and then you're going to click at one position. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit here so we can see. And I want it to be at the edge of my quilt, not all the way, not to the batting, because I'm really just designing on the quilt. So I click from edge to edge, and then when I release that, it thinks this is only 34 inches. But now, honestly, I can't lie. I don't remember exactly what the width of this quilt was. So let's just say it is 50 inches. And when I click OK, and actually you need to make sure, because I did raw edge to raw edge, you need to make sure you have your seam allowance in there also. So I'm going to do 50.5 to make sure that I've got that 1/4 inch. And it resizes the image based on what you put in. So I don't have to do the length and the width. I only have to do one or the other, or one block. I could also, now I know another way to do this that might have been better, even if I don't remember the size of the quilt. If I do the defined scale, let me zoom back in here. These strips are 2.5 inch strips. And so I could even work from that. So if I do define scale, I could click from here to here, and that's a 2.5 inch strip. So finished, it's 2 inches. So if I click 2 and click OK, it resizes my quilt to be that exact size. So I'm going to zoom out. Remember my trick that I told you, double click on your zoom tool and it'll bring it into perspective. Now, something I want to point out, notice that this image, it has some white space around it. That's my batting, because I had already basted this quilt and I hung my clips by the batting. so that I could get a picture of the entire quilt. So when you put in your measurements, this measurement that you get here, this is the measurement of your entire backdrop, which has some white space around it. So it says that this is a 53.6 by 65.62. That is the size of the entire image, not just the quilt. So a lot of times when you take a picture of your quilt, there's some excess stuff around it, but you only put in the measurements of the quilt top so that it is the correct size. Okay. So then the same thing applies here. You would choose your quilt layout and enter the information about your quilt. So this, a 53 by 65, and your block size, we'll talk about that in a minute. And then I'm going to put 0 for my sashing and no border here. Now notice that I've got 6 by 6 here set up. And so each one of these squares, if you were working with a a hoop that say is a 6 by 6, then you could leave that as it is. But notice this white space here. You're not quilting all the way to the edge. So you want to make sure that you're entering an amount that's going to go all the way to the edge of your quilt. Now, what I normally do in this instance, remember it has to fit in your hoop. So I usually start with a rectangle option, and I think to myself, I want to use my 10 by 10 hoop or my 8 by 12 hoop or whatever you want to use. And I usually subtract a little bit from that to give me a wiggle room. So let's say we're going to use our 8 by 12 hoop. That's one I use a ton. It's one of my favorite size hoops. So instead of the 8 by 12, I would actually start with, say, 7 by 11. And not 111. You notice you can actually make your blocks whatever you want them to be. And then I would adjust this to fill in my quilt. So it may take, 11 3/4 or, whatever. And if it's not divisible, you'll see that it won't fill in. So you may have to go down to even smaller. So say, you're 10 1/4 or 10 1/2. And I usually just play with these numbers till it gets to the edge there. But, you could easily just do the math as well to figure out. But the goal here, and my point is, you want this to go as close to that dash line as possible, but also fitting within your hoop. So 8, if we're using our 7 or our 7 by 12 hoop, then I can drop that, or 8 by 12, sorry, 8 by 12. Even this design size will still fit in the hoop. So there we go. So now, even though I've got a 7.5 by 10.75, that's equally divisible into my hoop, in my quilt, but it would still fit in my 8 by 12 hoop. Hopefully that, makes sense with you there. So in this case, what I would do here is I would be designing to fit within my hoop. Now, let's do this just for simplicity. Let's put the same color all over. So I'm just going to click and drag. And then we can bring in our design. So click and drag. I'm going to lighten up this color to, let's do the 10 again. That makes it nice and light. And now you can see on my quilt, I'm going to click over here with my select tool, and then we can lighten up our background. And then we can kind of see what this is going to look like. Now, if you are designing for this hoop, then you could put an entire design in here. So I'm going to put a design that'll fill that entire area. So let's do this one here. And I'm just going to rotate this around so that it's the correct orientation. And then I'm going to click my fit to cell option, and it actually filled that entire area. So if I turn off my backdrop, you can see it a little bit better there because it's kind of hard to see with the backdrop. But this being an exact image, I can see exactly what that quilting is going to look like on this quilt top. If I go back into my quilt settings, I could also make this darker or a different color. So maybe on this particular quilt, maybe let's see what a lime green color will look like. So that preview color is the actual design, and that's a little bit better, but still not super helpful. If I zoom in, we can kind of see that. So that's going to help you see that, but it also will allow you to audition your thread color. So let's see if something is red. So that shows up much better. So if I zoom in here, you can see, we can see that stitching a little bit better, or what it would look like stitched a little bit better. Okay. So because I set the size of my hoop and I filled the hoop with my design, then I know that's going to fit in the hoop that I want to use. So hopefully that makes sense to you in this case. And in this case, with this jelly roll quilt, I don't have specific blocks, so I don't have a setting here that is specific to a jelly roll quilt. Now you could do your blocks as the strips, and you could design, say, a whole row to break that up. So like for instance, all instead of this width of the quilt being broken up into blocks, you could put a whole the whole number there for 53, and it would be one strip. But then you would have to save those designs individually because it still has to fit in your hoop. And I'll show you what I mean on the next quilt. So, and hopefully that makes helps make sense on the actual photograph. Now, let's talk about another type of layout. So I have a circle. If you've ever wanted to do like a table topper or quilt a tree skirt, what I normally do is I actually make a square of my batting and backing. The instead of it being round, I make it square. That's what I was trying to say. So the batting and the backing, I leave it square so that when I'm planning my quilt here, and this entire design here was a 56-inch square. So if I go back in here and put my 56, and then again, you would probably put whatever size hoop that you want to work with here. So make that your rectangle hoop size. So 56 by 56 here. And then no sashing and no border. And so for your hoop size, maybe you want to use your 6 by 10 for this. And so you could put 6 by 10. Now this up here is not going to make much of a difference because we've got a lot of excess, and I'll show you what I mean. But let's color this in with one of our colors. So I'm going to do a green. Remember, this is going to be the same design. I'm just showing you layout. If you want different designs, make sure you color different colors. And then let's start with a dark color and see if it'll show up. And then I'm going to lighten this up and then click OK. And now you can see that even though I didn't go all the way to the edge, I knew I had extra space here because I put this big square of batting and backing. And so what I would do is I probably would not even quilt this A1, even though when we fill this with a design. So let's just choose something that would work here. That's a rectangular shape. And so you know, whatever you want to do here. Maybe these stars would be cute. And I'm going to rotate them so they'd be the rectangular direction. And then I'm going to click my fit to cell. But now this A1, even though I'm using it for planning purposes, why even bother stitching it? Because it doesn't even fall on our quilt. But making a square with my planning, it just helps me plan this rectangle. Now, if you were, let me turn off my layout. If you were actually wanting to make designs fall into these areas here, then that's more of a custom quilting thing. So My Quilt Embellisher probably would be better for that. But you certainly could rotate designs and manipulate them to fit right on here. And if I zoom back out, remember, double click the zoom tool, and I'm actually going to undo, and I'm going to go back to where I have nothing but my shape here. You do not have to put the quilt plan on top of it. It's just an easy way to do your planning. I could actually plan right on top of this image without doing the quilt, and I could bring in a design that maybe would fit into these shapes or these quadrants. So I could do that as well. You don't have to do the quilt plan. If you do the quilt plan, one export will save all the designs. But if you were to design on this and you have different designs in every area, you would have to save them all separately. That's where the quilt plan is really helpful. Okay. So now let's see another example. And I'll show you of an image that I imported. So let me go and see. So here's another image here that I was working on. And I'm going to turn this darker so you can see it. So this is an image of the t-shirt quilt that I created for my husband. I took a photograph of this. These blocks are 17-inch blocks to cover the whole front of the shirt or the back of the shirt, whichever it was. And then if the shirt had a front logo or emblem, then this is a 5-inch square. So then make sure you set your scale, and you could measure either one. You know, since this is a 5-inch area, you could click across here and then choose that as a, you know, that's 5 to set that size to make sure that it's going to be on the right one. So let me undo here and show you what I've got. So this, I want to make it lighten. Now what I did here, look how I only have one giant square. So if I go into my quilt settings, my quilt size was 59 by 73, and I set my entire block for 59 by 73. That is going to allow me to just at free will design wherever I want to. Just keep in mind that the designs you pull on here need to fit in your hoop. If you don't have it set broken up by your hoop size because you want to kind of do this free design, just remember they do need to fit. So here I have, this is a 17-inch square, remember, and I've got 4 blocks here that I could use to do the quilting, and each one is just about an 8 by 9 design size. So these 4, I would hoop 4 separate hoopings because I don't have a 17 by 17 hoop. Now, just for playing purposes, I've done a few other things here on either side of these. I didn't want to quilt over the actual emblem, so I just made some smaller blocks here on either side. And I'm just planning, I'm just playing. Now, if you want every single t-shirt to be the same, you could also just plan on one piece of the t-shirt. So let me flip over here and show you that. So here I've imported an image of just one of the shirts. And if I planned on just that one shirt, but I wanted every one of them to be the same, I could just plan on this one and export my design. So here you can see that I've got just these star quilting designs around the edge here. These, again, a 17 by 17. I don't have a hoop that long, so I actually have these stars broken up into separate pieces. So these two here together make the length that I need, and these two make the width that I need. And then these are separate designs here. So if I were to export this, I could use this on my entire quilt over here. And I'm just designing for one block. So if I paste this, maybe this is, let me do an undo and paste it again so that it's, wrong button, not print. So I want paste. So, and here is my one design. So maybe you are wanting to do this for every block. You don't have to design the entire quilt. You could always just take a photograph like I've done here. Let me do my undo here. And you're just designing on one block, but this would maybe work for each of the blocks. So, and you're going to be hooping these separate. So even if you didn't get those perfectly right, they're separate hoopings, you can get them lined up. So, and then I could paste again and just see what that's going to look like. What is going on with my paste here? Every time I click paste, it's not wanting to to paste. So there we go. But if you are doing the same thing on every block and your blocks are unique like these, you could always design on one block. Let me go back to my picture here. Design on one block and then export that, and those designs would be stitched individually on your quilt, and you could get those lined up on your entire quilt. So hopefully that helps with that. So let's see if we have any questions that we need to address. And so I'm going to back up here and see kind of where we left off. And so let me start with the B. So maybe I can get to all of them. So Yvonne says the price of the software. So Yvonne, first, so we're just educating today. We're not selling, but you certainly can check with your local dealer. That's what I recommend first and foremost. So check with your local dime dealer for any specials, because a lot of times they offer a better price than even you can get from our website. So check with your local Inspiration software dealer or your dime dealer. You can look on our website, dzgns.com, find a dealer that's near you, and enter in your zip code by doing and using that locator. That will work for that. But check that. You're going to get the best price on that software. But we're just educating, so I don't have anything special for that. So, and then Jennifer Alexander says, were all of those closed embroidery designs showed? Yes, they were. You could use if you're doing the repeat with edge to edge designs that have the run stitch that you're connecting, you could also do this with those designs. That's more of what I did last week, or 2 weeks ago. So check that out, Jennifer, if you need a refresher on that. But the ones that I were using, they were all closed, meaning they don't have like a tail that we have to connect to one another. So that's a great question too. So and then Linda Johnson says, when you use Perfect Stitch Viewer on the Mac, can you use it on the Mac? Yes, you absolutely can. All of our software works on Windows or Mac computers. So love my Perfect Stitch Viewer. And then the Facebook user says, yes, the edges. So if 9.5 by 10, you will have some space between your blocks. So yes, a little bit, because I don't want it to all the way go to my seam allowance every time. Now that's a designer choice. That's my choice. You could make it go all the way to the edge of your 10 by 10 block, because I don't always stitch perfectly straight. So if I have like a 9.5 by 9.5, then I know if my seam allowance is off, it's still going to fall within my block. And again, that's just a personal preference. You do not have to do the designing that way. And so it's really up to you. And then Libby says, last program you mentioned auditioning thread color on the actual photo. Will you be able to elaborate on that? So yes, whenever I changed the preview color to a color that we could see, the preview color is that thread color. And I'll go back and show you that over here. So let me head back over to my software and I'll show you what I mean. Let me find that. Where's that Jelly Roll quilt? And that's a good example. Okay, so here, notice that I've got one design in this quilt. I'm actually let me hide my backdrop here so that we can see this better. So notice I have one blue design and the others are red. Okay, so the blue design is the only design on the screen. If I move that outside of my quilt, you can see that it is just one design. And when I put it in any of these blocks and I center it or fit to cell there, so I'm going to do my fit to cell, and I'm not sure why that is not coming on here, but because it is in that that cell there, the actual design is a thread color down below. So if I wanted to see what that color was going to look like in, say, orange, I could do a right mouse click and you could see it in orange. But notice that these others did not change. And I'm going to do my undo and put that back on my on the lined up on the quilt right there. And so let's change this one. Let's do yellow so we can see a difference there. But notice all of these other ones are still red. Those are the preview of this design. So we've got the thread color set to yellow, but if you want to see what yellow looks like all over, go back into your quilt settings. The preview color is the preview color of your design. And that will change all of the previews because we only have one design on the screen. It pulls from your color chips down below. So I'm going to go to red. And then if we go back to our preview, color here in our settings, and I can choose red. You can also do custom colors, so you can add maybe a little bit darker red if you wanted. So add that one, and then I can choose it and click OK. And then now you can see I've got red everywhere. So that's how you would audition your thread colors. The preview is the preview of the design, and the actual design that you have on the screen, you can change the color chip below. And in Dime software, when you select a design and you do a right mouse click, it selects that color. You can see my design changing up there on the screen as I right mouse click on these different color chips. So hopefully that helps you there. So that was a really good question too. And then let's see what else we've got here. So just looking to see if there's any other questions. So Linda Johnson says, several years ago before ETS, I tried Perfect Stitch Viewer and it did not work. Do I understand that that problem has been resolved? I can buy it now and it will work. So Linda, if you purchased it several years ago, you do not have to repurchase it. But if you tried it as in a trial, then absolutely, when you purchase it, it will work. But if you ever purchase a Dime software and it does not work, then make sure you contact technical support or reach out to our education team over on our YouTube, or not YouTube, the Facebook user group, because we are always happy to assist. Sometimes it's just little things, sometimes it may need technical support to take a look at it. So but make sure that you give it another try. If you already purchased it, you do not need to repurchase it. That serial number is yours for life, so you can just try to do that install again. And then Marianne said you could use a design or a plan for a table runner the way that you did with the t-shirt. Absolutely. For the entire size. Totally. Yes. And I mean, it doesn't necessarily just have to be table runner or things that are square. We saw round. You could use things even for small ones, placemats, pillow shams, things like that. Absolutely. Very good point, Marianne. And so any other last questions before we go? So Lee says, is there a way to do a layout for a quilt with offsetting blocks? So there is a layout called brick in the settings, but still even the brick setting is kind of uniform. And so in those quilt settings, try the drop down list and use the brick for your setting, and you'll see what I mean there. So, and then Facebook user, I don't see a name on Facebook user. I think you have to let StreamYard know that it's or not StreamYard, Facebook know that it's okay to use your name. But it says today is everything you are showing in just the planner. Yes, it is. So I try to only show the features in the software we're talking about, but the way that I manipulated the design, loading a backdrop, also using the select tool, the zoom tool, the alignment tools, those actually are the same across all Dime software if your program has that feature. But what I'm showing you today as far as the quilt planning is all about My Quilt Planner. Another great question. So, and then Linda says, do you have to use a specific browser like Safari to use the Perfect Stitch Viewer on the Mac? And the Perfect Stitch Viewer does not use a browser. It will show your designs as images inside of the folder. So on a Mac, inside of Finder, you can change the your view to icons or the list. And if you change it to icons, it will show the little images. So that's inside of Finder on Mac or File Explorer on PC to see those images. And then Gail says, what about a table topper that has 3 sections, 8-inch squares, 4-inch squares, 8-inch squares, and you want a separate design on each? Yes, Gail, that is the perfect example of what we're talking about today. So take a photograph and bring that in. Make sure you set the scale. And then what I would do, if you want every single section to have different designs, then just make one big block and then lay your designs out there. And then you'll do your export quilt and it'll actually save all those designs individually for you with just one click. That's the nice thing about putting the plan on there, even if it is just one big open area, because it'll export all the designs at once. So I definitely would do that in that fashion. So let's see if we've got any others here. And so I think that's all the questions that I see. So the last thing that I want to say before we do go is that next week, week, we are shifting from quilting to My Lace Maker. Not next week, 2 weeks from now. So May the 2nd is our next Software Success Facebook Live. So I'm going to be using My Lace Maker for that particular Software Success. My Lace Maker is a software program that will allow you to create your own freestanding lace, and you do not need to know how to digitize in order to do that, because we have some built-in designs, and we also have built-in features that will actually make your freestanding lace for you with just a couple of clicks. So I'm going to go over kind of the getting started with My Lace Maker, the basics, how to create your own freestanding lace design with just a few clicks. And again, don't forget that even this software program, there's a lot of commonalities as far as the icons in our software, those alignment tools, the backdrops, things like that. And so those things I'll be using throughout all of these software Facebook Lives, and they are great to learn no matter which dime program that you have. But My Lace Maker on May 2nd, getting started with that. So join me in a couple of weeks. So hopefully this was helpful, and I will see you in a couple of weeks. Thank you so much for joining.